Welcome to Drinking with Authors. I'm your host, Erica Lance. My amazing teal-colored haired co-host today is Bo Lake, and our guest is Jeremy Whitley. Welcome, welcome.
Oh, thank you. Glad to be here.
Yes, okay, so let's talk about what we're drinking. So it's very cold here in the hills of North Carolina. So in my World's Best Boss office mug, um, which somebody who worked for me gave this to me, so I'm not quite sure what that says. But anyway, I made a hot toddy, but I made it this time a little bit different because I made it like a tea, but then I put whiskey in it, like you do. By the way, honey whiskey is the best for this because then you don't have to put honey in it. Hmm. Okay, Bo, what creative drink do you have for us today?
Mine is not creative. It is only a normal coffee, but it's also cold here. There's snow on the ground. So
Yeah,
that's my excuse.
I'm lucky that there's not snow on the ground here, but it's still cold. Jeremy, what are you drinking?
I am drinking a coffee from the Kauai Coffee Company, which is I think a macadamia nut coffee. It's very good, but just a coffee because I do have to drive to go pick up my kids later.
Fine, I will drink for all of us. I don't mind. I don't mind. Okay. So for our listeners that may not know you, Jeremy, what is your origin story? What do you write? Where do we begin? Let's start, shall we?
Yeah, I have I've been a bit of a nerd all my life. I got it, I think, from my dad, who was you know, who I grew up with him reading Marvel comics and Tolkien and C.S. Lewis and every other fantasy thing under the sun. And I always really enjoyed those, and I had always wanted to be a writer. And so I went through years of school. I went to the University of North Carolina for creative writing, and there coming out of there, the feeling was it's a great program, but they really hate anything that smells at all like genre fiction. So anything that's fun to write,
Yeah, no, they're
fantasy or
like, write a forlorn literary fiction story about, yeah, no, I get it. And
yeah,
that's
I
unfortunate with a lot of
described most
college
of the stories that
programs.
people wrote in there as stories about sad 30-something white men. It's sort of like the vibe. Um, So yeah, I mean, coming out of there, I just wanted to like write things that were fun again. And so I got into comics, which I'd really been into as a kid, and I started sort of self-publishing some of my own stuff with my friends who were artists. I did my first comic, which is not widely available these days, is called The Order of Dagonet, and it's about a basically the all the mythological creatures of Britain return and start wreaking havoc on England, and the only people who can stop them are the knights of Britain, but of course they're modern knights, so they're all actors and authors and rock stars and things like that.
I love
Um,
that.
yeah, well, thank you. That one was a lot of fun. It never really got anywhere. And as I was doing that, I started writing another book with another friend of mine. It's called Princeless. It's about a princess who is uh, locked away by her parents to wait for a handsome prince to come rescue her. She decides to break out and rescue herself instead, teams up with her guardian dragon to go rescue all of her sisters who are also locked up. Um, and that one got a publisher and it got some acclaim and it got nominated for some awards and it won some other ones. We got nominated for a couple of Eisner Awards, which are basically as good as it gets in comics awards. Um, and so that sort of led into Princeless being an ongoing thing, and then our spinoff to that, Raven the Pirate Princess, which I describe as my gay teen pirate soap opera. And then yeah, I mean those sort of got me jobs other places, and continued to make new stuff as well as those, and got a chance to do some other cool things like writing a lot of issues of My Little Pony and getting to play around in the Marvel Universe some myself.
Very cool. Well, it sounds like the cool thing is that you definitely went down what you love as writing, right?
Oh, yeah.
I also love that you didn't bend to what other people are saying, and writers out there, I hope you really pay attention to that. There is an audience for what you want to write. It just depends, and you may have to look for your audience, but it's there. So let's talk about your most recent work. What is your most recent work?
Oh, yeah, so many coming out at any given time. Um, I think, let's see, just in the last, so in February, I have a new story coming out, which is called The Cold Ever After, which I is my first sort of really adult graphic novel, and that it has lots of blood and violence and sex and nudity and all that fun stuff. Um, and it is I described it as an sort of a queer Arthurian noir story. It has elements of some of my favorite things being, Arthurian literature, stuff about, knights and dragons and all that, but then like with the edge of that sort of like seedy underbelly crime noir, having a PI who is sort of narrating everything as it's going on, because it's about a woman who is the champion of this kingdom, who was their knight, who sort of had an illicit affair with the queen, and got booted and exiled, and now is being sort of called back into service because the princess has gone missing, and she is the only one the queen trusts to find the princess, who she basically helped to raise as if she were her own.
Oh, wow. That's very cool.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Yeah, that one is it's one that has been sort of in the works for a long time and has bounced around to a couple of different publishers. But my illustrator on that, Megan Wong, is really incredible. Worked on some stuff on Princeless with me, and that one was just sort of like a passion project that we've been sort of slowly making for like 5 years in the background now.
No, and sometimes that's, yeah, time. So where do you get the ideas for your stories? Like, I love that idea. I love the detective narrating, like all that stuff. Where do you get the ideas? Because you're kind of taking some tropes and like twisting them, right, on their heads.
Yeah, I mean that's sort of my favorite thing. I think, especially as somebody who grew up on fantasy stuff, there are a lot of sort of recurring tropes that you see over and over and over, and a lot that as you read them and as you get older, you think, oh wow, don't love that we're doing this again. What if we did something different? Like, what if we turned this thing on its head, turned it, just any impulse you have to do the same thing again? What if you just go like 90 degrees from that and do something that's unexpected and different? And I think with Princeless, that's always sort of been my rule with that, is if I feel myself steering into something that seems really obvious, I try to go the other direction. And in the case of the Cold Ever After, um, it was a thing where I had been working on a lot of like licensed books, things that I, got paid to write, and so only occasionally got to decide what I actually wrote about. Um, and I really wanted to like do some new original stuff, and I wanted some fresh ideas. And so I sort of took the concept of like, what if I took these genres that I like and I enjoy, and I found a way to like put a couple together in ways that like I'd never seen before. Um, so Arthurian uh questing and noir, I feel like have a lot in common in having that person who is sort of like subservient to this higher power that's manipulating them, and doesn't have all the facts and is trying to figure everything out on their own. But they have, stylistically and time period wise very different. So just like, what if we took that and we had sort of just this dab of sort of Game of Thrones court intrigue stuff, and made that sort of the impetus for this to be a noir story inside of this fantasy world.
I love that. Bo, before I monopolize all the questions,
What is it like to write something that is someone else's intellectual property, like working on My Little Pony?
Um, it is it can be fun. I mean, it's nice to like get to play in that sandbox, because I think, with My Little Pony, or in my case even more with some of the Marvel stuff, like these are characters that I know well. In some cases I grew up with, and like to get to tell those stories and know that, somebody else is going to read your version of that's going to inform their like feelings about this character, and to really get to like the heart of these characters that you are really important to you is such a cool experience. But also it means being sort of at the whim of not just, you have your editor, which most of the editors I've worked with are great. But there is sort of this looming elder god type creature that's just called editorial. And editorial will say things to me, and I do not know who is saying them or for what reason. I will just get an email that says, editorial thinks this, or editorial says we can't do that. Editorial says that, this is the romantic relationship, and these people are not to do this, that, or the other. Which is when you're used to telling your own stories, especially when you're somebody like me who occasionally tells them sort of by the seat of your pants, when you have a good idea, even though it's not in the outline, you just get to like, all right, everything's changing now. Having so much oversight that if you do that, if you change everything at the last minute, you've created a mountain of work for yourself and several other people, and there's a good chance you're just going to end up right back where you started anyway. So yeah, it's a strange experience, and I think one that you have to it's got a bit of a bell curve. Like you have to figure out how to make it work and how to play the system a little better, right? At least let it work for you. I made the comment to one of my editors on My Little Pony at some point that like all of those comics have to go through both my comics editorial at IDW, and then they have to go on to Hasbro, because Hasbro owns the intellectual property. They have to approve everything that goes in there. And occasionally my editor will highlight something and they'll say, oh, Hasbro's not going to like this. And I'm like, I get it. I get that they're probably not going to like that. Let's leave it in, because a lot of times, people feel like they need to have some kind of note on a thing. And so if we leave that as like the thing that people are, that the Hasbro editorial is going to say, you can't do that. And then this other thing, we don't know about that. Maybe we can get away with that other thing if we have this thing for them to nix, knowing that they're probably going to nix it from the beginning. And in a lot of cases, I found, not just with Hasbro, but with, intellectual property that'll work, because it's, people feel like I feel like it's mean to say they feel like they need to justify their job, their existence, but also like, anytime you're reading something like that and you're like, I don't have any notes, you feel like, what is the point of me at this juncture? So
is anyone reading this? Are they going to throw it away? What's going on?
Yeah. The idea that, because I definitely had the moment where I felt like they didn't have any notes. Did they read it? Because I did crazy stuff in here. I don't know why they wouldn't have any notes. So I've had at least one My Little Pony story that I was like, this is super dark. There's no way they're going to go for this. And then they've signed off on it. I wrote a story that was called The Siege of the Crystal Empire, where we introduced these, like, I had written them as sort of like shadow ponies. I was like, they're kind of shadowy. It's hard to see exactly what they look like. And then my artist drew them. And what he drew was horrifying. What he drew was like a horse skeleton with like shade around it. So like, it looked like they were running from giant horse skeletons. And I was like, there is no way Hasbro's going to sign off on this. And then it came back and Hasbro was like, great, we love it. It's like, do you though?
Did we send the right file? Is this the file you actually? It's always funny when you have those kind of thoughts about anything and the person receiving it is like, good. And you're like, but wait, there is supposed to be a reaction. Aren't you going to at least question it? Aren't you going to wonder what I was
We were supposed to fight about this. I prepared myself for a fight.
Yeah, and that's the most surprising thing, because I've had the at like San Diego Comic-Con and things like that, I've had the pleasure to meet some of the people who, work on the other side for Hasbro, who I don't normally see. And that's the only story that I've ever had somebody from Hasbro be like, "Oh, this story, I really loved that one." And I was like, "Yeah, okay. All right." Like,
Well,
I
I
love it
love
too,
when
but
the
it
children have
seemed like,
nightmares.
yeah, it did seem like we were gonna give kids nightmares.
Well, I gotta say something about that. I think it's interesting as an artist, and I'd love to hear your feedback on this before we go to break, is as an artist, we have a perception of what we think people will like about our stories, or what we like, what are our favorite parts and the parts we loved creating. And then we're expecting other people to do that. And then they're like, hey, I like the dog Sal that you put in the book. And you're like, that dog was just there because somebody was walking a dog and I needed somebody to walk a dog. Like, and they're like, Sal's the best dog. Write a whole story about Sal. And you're like, okay, cool. What are your thoughts and what feedback have you gotten like that you were totally like, but what about my cool character that I create?
Yeah, I feel like I've gotten a lot of those sort of things in I think in writing IP stuff, especially with Marvel, it's you never really know what people are gonna latch on to, because there's people that just love certain characters, and then when we read anything with them in it, even if like they have no interest in your book, if say Spider-Man is in it that week, they will come for Spider-Man. Um, and yeah, having working on Unstoppable Wasp, which was my big book I did at Marvel, which had like a lot of stuff that we were dealing with that was like big emotional beats and stuff. But then like, I had sort of written this dynamic of, two of the existing characters, the original Wasp, Jan, and Bobby, who's Mockingbird, has been sort of like the character's two mentors that were sort of working together. And a lot of people like really fixated on that relationship. And I created some sort of like online ship where like people were just like, Bobby and Janet are like, they're my ultimate ship. They should be together. Like they definitely love each other. And I was like, all right. Oh, like they're together for like a total of 10 pages in the whole like 10 issue run. But like, yeah, they're it's a playful, fun thing. But like some people have gotten really, really much more into that than I had ever imagined or intended at that point.
That's very, very cool. Okay, we have to take a quick break and we will be right back to Team with Drinking with Authors. Hey, listeners, you know me, Eric Lance. You're just listening to me in the podcast that you have. But guess what? I'm doing something new.
Yeah, she's joining me, Mark Muncy, the author of the Erie, Florida book series in Erie, Appalachia, and we are hosting a new podcast called Erie Travels.
Woo-woo! Erie Travels, which covers things like ghosts, cryptids, weird stuff, UFOs, men in black, all kinds of fun things that people talk about, and I'm sure you've discussed with friends.
Yep, and you can listen to us on your favorite podcast platform of choice, or find us at erietravels.com and join in the fun and all the spooky goodness.
And of course, Mark, what do we always say?
We'll see you on the other side.
Oh my gosh, I just made Bo laugh. AI monkey in the works. But to my AI overlords out there, I love and appreciate you. And in the future, when you take over, anything you need me to do, you just let me know. Okay, so Bo, what's your next question?
Well, I had one and now you made me forget what it was. Is there any IP that you want to work for that you wish with all your heart they would call and be like, hey, you want to write a book for us?
Ooh. That's a tough one because I like challenges. So when something comes to me and I'm like, I don't know what I would do with that to me is like an interesting situation as well, where it's just like, all right, like let's figure out how to make this work. I'm I, I've always been a big sucker for X-Men stuff, and I've gotten a chance to write a few X-Men here and there. But I'd always love to do something big and weird with X-Men, because they're great at doing weird stuff. They're very adaptable characters, I find. They do a lot of like racism metaphors, but also a lot of space operas. Like it's just sort of the way they run. But yeah, I think like I love doing stuff like that, but I also love challenges of sort of reinventing things. I got a chance to, for unfortunately brief time, because of the publisher at the time, but I got a chance to write a relaunch of Rainbow Bright, and getting to like
Ooh.
get in that world and be like, all right, there's a lot of vagary as to how things work in this world, because it was basically all created to sell toys and greeting cards. But like to get in there and be like, all right, I'm gonna try and figure out like how the mechanics of this work and give like a real world building exercise in this. That was a lot of fun to sort of like just get in and get my hands dirty. So I feel like the thing I want to write is like a thing that I don't even know is an option right now.
Rainbow Bright, like that's interesting. I loved Rainbow Bright as a kid. I love that cartoon. It made me
Yeah,
so
and
happy.
going back and watching the cartoon as an adult is wild, because one, some of the stuff is super dark. But then there are a lot of things in there that you're like, oh, so this was the toy we wanted to sell this week. So there's not so much a plot in this episode as a toy.
No, it's interesting. It's true though, but I think that's true with a lot of comics and stuff like that. You go back and you watch them as an adult. Like, I mean, one of my first things into that was Scooby-Doo. You go back and watch Scooby-Doo and you're like, wow, there are so many drug references. It's like not bad, but it's just like Shaggy is a stoner. So is probably Scooby. I mean, it's bad, and it's so funny how they but it's true with like the Flintstones and things like that. If you watch all of those as an adult, you go, look at what these people managed to slide in. The kids would be completely like, yeah, it's true with SpongeBob too. Um, okay, so what are your future projects? What's on the horizon for you?
Oh, let's see. I've got some stuff that's not announced that hopefully people will be able to keep up and pay attention with what I have going on. I do have a book that was announced that I'm co-writing with my friend and co-podcast host Ben Kahn, which is it's called the Dashing School for Wayward Princes, which is about a group of a group of princes who are scheduled to inherit their various thrones, who are not measuring up to what the expectations of princes are. So they get basically sent to a school that's jobs to teach them toxic masculinity, so that they can all be appropriately princely when they take over, but sort of about them bonding and sort of finding this way to work together to manipulate the system, because they've all got sort of different issues, from the prince that would rather be a warlock, to the prince that would rather be a princess, to the prince who's just too small, or likes boys. Everybody's got sort of their own thing that makes them not sort of fit this bill, and they're all trying to just figure out their way through it.
Very cool. So you didn't talk about your podcast yet.
Oh, yeah. So my podcast is called Progressively Horrified. And myself and two of my friends basically talk about horror movies from a progressive lens. So, we sit down with both horror movies that are intended to be progressive in some aspects, and plenty that aren't. That our sort of pitch is like we're judging horror movies by standards that they never agreed to. But yeah, the idea is sort of like, I feel like there's so much of a feeling that the horror community in general, or even in some horror communities, that there's a sort of broy atmosphere, that they don't welcome analysis or welcome like people really picking them apart. But I think there are a lot of, you know, progressive and queer folks who love horror and get into that stuff and really like want to have somebody to talk about it with and share it with. You know, when it's I think generally considered to be sort of a low art form, but you know, sort of we get together and talk about a scary movie and the ways in which it is and isn't progressive, and also just bullshit about a lot about all the crazy stuff that happens in horror movies.
I love that. I love that. Okay, so Bo, questions?
Well, now I need to know his favorite horror movie.
That's a tough one. There's a lot of good ones, but I think my favorite is still The Babadook, which I think just does what it's doing so perfectly and has this like it's also just one of those movies that I know I watched at the right time, because like having kids, it is a movie about like dealing with all the stuff that's going on in your life while also dealing with kids, and uses this creature as sort of this metaphor for like the ways in which you're failing your kids and the ways in which you're, you know, damaging, like, you know, you're damaging your kids just by just, you know, trying to survive. And you know, this creature is sort of representing this grief and this underpinning of those emotions. And it was definitely at a point that I watched it where like I wasn't sleeping enough because, you know, I had a you know, 2-year-old, and I was like, oh my God, I am the Babadook. Oh no. Like, and it's just one of those moments where you're like, oh, I watched this at either the very right or very wrong time. And it's one of those that every time I go back and watch it, even though like it's still just as affecting to me. There's a lot of horror movies that, you know, the second or third time you watch them, you know everything's coming, and they just don't get you the same way. That one is a great one, and I think followed closely by just about everything Jordan Peele has ever made.
Very
You reminded me that I watched Hereditary right after having a baby, and yeah,
Oof.
that was a bad choice.
That's a rough one. Hereditary is still
Yeah.
one of the most traumatic horror movies I've ever watched. Definitely one of the few where something horrible happened and I had to like rewind it just to make sure what I thought had happened had actually happened. Which, if anybody's seen Hereditary, they know exactly what I'm talking about.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's definitely like, it was one of those that coming away from it, I was like, I'm not sure I'm glad I watched this movie. Which I just
feel
watched.
uncomfortable.
I just watched Ari Aster's newest movie, Beau is Afraid, which I felt very similar coming away from. I was like, I don't know that I'm happy that I watched this.
Okay, so I have to say, I watched a movie in a different time frame, but I watched Titanic right after I had my son, and that scene where the less wealthy person, they lock them downstairs and she's singing her kids to sleep. That acted as a horror movie to me. Like, I lost it. I'm just gonna throw that at, not a horror movie, totally acted as a horror movie. I was like, could you imagine knowing that what's gonna happen and you're sitting there trying to sing your kids to sleep to give them some kind of comfort as this goes down?
That's that reminds me a lot of right after my wife and I had our first kid, my daughter who's now 12. We were like, we finally had a night that like our parents were watching the kids and we could just go out and do something, and we decided to go see a movie, and not really knowing anything about it, we went to see Beasts of the Southern Wild. And like 5 or 10 minutes into that movie, there's a scene where like this girl is home alone after her father has just like screamed at her and mistreated her, and she's trying to like cook for herself, and she accidentally like sets part of the house on fire. And my wife was like, I have to leave. I have to leave. I cannot stay here anymore. I cannot watch this movie right now. And so to this day, I still have not seen anything but like the first 15 minutes of that film.
She's like, the house is burning down. We have to go home.
Yes,
Well,
I have to not be in this room where the child is in danger on the screen.
Well, that brings up a point about the creativity that we do, because you don't look at that. I'm sure, most people wouldn't think, oh my gosh, this is going to trigger parents, but maybe when the writers did it, went, this is going to trigger parents, right? It's that whole theory that you want to create an impact with your writing. What is, you hope to create those kind of impacts where, I hope when people read my stuff too, it does create those emotional impacts, good or bad, in a way that it's when we talk about thought-provoking writing, that's what we're talking about, right? Is that you sit there and go, I'm not watching this movie. I gotta go see if kids burn the house down. Like, and I mean, of course, our logic brain goes, our parents would notify us if the kids burn the house down. But logic disappears sometimes when things are triggered, right?
Yeah,
So,
absolutely.
okay, so what is something before we get into literary briefs after this, or secondary question, what is something that you didn't expect as an author that you ran into?
I think, I feel like throughout creative writing class, especially in college, there's this very there was this thing with my teachers where it was like, you just want to create some kind of emotional impact. You want to have an impact on people. You want people to care about something. And like, I think after having done it for a while, there's definitely moments where you're like, I do want to have an impact, but I want it to be ultimately a good impact. Like I do want, people to come away from this. I often want people to come away from my work feeling seen, or feeling like somebody has heard and recognized them, and in a way that they hadn't before. And I feel like there's a real responsibility in there that historically a lot of like authors and stuff have pushed off, but like I take very seriously, in that like when I was writing Unstoppable Wasp again, there's part of that story is that she is Hank Pym's daughter, the original Ant-Man, Giant Man, who in comics historically, like back in the 70s and 80s, had mental problems, and they were very bad at discussing what these mental problems were. They didn't really understand them. Eventually, they got sort of nailed down as one thing, then another. But ultimately, it just became a question of like, oh, he's manic depressive, he's bipolar, and it's like, oh well, that's unfortunate, because it ends up painting a very bad picture of what a bipolar person looks like and what it's like to deal with that stuff. And so when we were writing Nadia, I had this idea pretty early on that I was like, well, bipolar disorder is something that is passed down through families. So if we get a chance, I would like to write a story about her dealing with that. And we ended up deciding to do it. I ended up getting the chance to tell this story, and I have never spent so long writing so little, because it's and it unfolds over about 2 issues of comics, so about 40 pages total. And I just like, it's a part of writing that I'd never really thought about before, that like spent a lot of time talking to people and interviewing people and having people read over what I'd written and then give me feedback. And we talked to people who have dealt with having bipolar disorder themselves, who have family members that have bipolar disorder, people who are psychologists who know the ins and outs of everything, and just sort of like fine-tuning that to be a story that would ultimately have a positive impact rather than a potentially triggering one. And I'm really, really proud of how that came out, and what is ultimately a Marvel IP story that I got the chance to write some superhero stuff in, and ended up making it a big sort of mental health story in a way that I don't think anybody had ever initially thought going into that we were going to do. And I'm really proud of the way it came out and came together.
Very cool. I love that. I love that. Okay, let's move into literary briefs. Dun dun dun. I don't know if he adds in music. I hope he does.
Is
but
that our theme song for that?
I
Dun,
don't know
dun,
what
dun.
it is, but it's fine.
Bum, bum,
My job
bum.
is to drink and ask things. That's my entire job on the show. Okay, so the first question is, of course, what is your favorite book of all time?
Oh goodness. I feel like that's an impossible question to answer. Um, I have a lot of favorite books and comic books. I don't reread a ton of stuff generally. Um, but I think as far as stuff that I've actually reread, um, I'll give a comic book answer and a book answer.
Okay.
For comic books, it's probably Kieran Gillen and Jamie McKelvey did a Young Avengers series that really does a lot of really interesting things, both with story and art, that I never get tired of going back to and reading. And um, they have some really interesting characters, but also just some of the pages are just fascinating to look at because they do sort of unique things. And then on the reading side, it's tough because there's a lot of serious books that I had to read for various things that I love, but I think if it was you have to just go pick up a book that you've already read and read it again, it would um, probably be either The Princess Bride or The Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy, both of which are books that I feel are just infinitely entertaining. And coming away from them, I always go, oh, man, I wish I was that clever.
Oh, I'll tell you, I feel that way about Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy, and I love The Princess Bride. Hitchhikers is one of my favorite books of all time because I feel like you can read it and it's like watching some really good television show or whatever where you see things again for the first time, even though you read them. You go,
Mhm.
oh, that's actually really, really funny. Like,
Yeah, and I think if you read it as a teenager the first time and then you read it again as an adult, you're like, did I understand any of this the first time? All of these jokes, I'm pretty sure I wouldn't have gotten 10 years ago.
yeah, yeah. No, I agree with that. Okay, so now it's the opposite. What is your least favorite book / comic, I guess? We get to ask 2 questions for the price of 1.
Um, Boy, that's a tough one. Um, my least favorite. I'm gonna go with a play because over being in school, I had to read King Lear several times, and I think King Lear is interminably boring. And everybody has to read it, and everybody talks about how great it is. And every time I've read it, I've been like, man, this could be about half the length it is. It would be much more enjoyable.
He needs an editor.
Yeah, I love a Macbeth. I even love I love Hamlet, something that has a significant forward motion. King Lear is just so slow. Even just the adaptations like Ran, the Kurosawa adaptation. That's the one Kurosawa movie that I'm like, I'll pass. I don't want to watch that again.
Wow. Okay. Uh, what about a comic?
Um, God, there's so many bad comics. That's what happens when you have to put something out every month, is there's a lot of bad ones. Um, it's tough because I feel like comics is so because everything is so tied together, there are some things that have very negative impacts on all of comics. I think as much as technically good as it is, I really dislike Frank Miller's The Dark Knight Returns, his
Oh,
big Batman story, because I really think that like between that and Watchmen, everybody learned a lot of the wrong lessons about about making comics. And for a good like 15 years, comics were just like very self-serious and up their own ass because of
yeah.
those two books. And I feel like it's just really in the last 5 or 10 years that we've recovered from that.
I love that. Okay, Bo, what about you? You can ask, I will monopolize.
What is your favorite comic, like superhero comic trope?
Ooh.
Um, I am a sucker for like emotionally manipulative stuff in comics. Uh, the there's every so often people will pass around the panels from All-Star Superman of him like just uh stopping the girl from committing suicide by telling her that she matters, or um the I think the wildest one is maybe like, and this is funny because I've done it myself, is like dogs in comics. People would just use dogs to wildly manipulate anybody. You can immediately make somebody a bad guy by having them kick a dog, or you can like make a story that would be kind of, you know, mediocre, sad by adding in just like a companion dog who's there to like help. And I think it reminds me of Grant Morrison has a short comic called We Three, which is about, a dog, a cat, and a bunny who escaped from an animal research facility where they've been weaponized. So they've had all these sort of, weapons grafted into them and everything. But the dog is, can talk, and he's just frequently asking everybody if he's a good dog. And I was just like, oh, it's so sad. He just wants to be a good dog.
Oh my gosh. I love that. Okay, what about if you could go into any literary sort of comic world, where would you go and why?
Ooh. That's a good question, because there are a lot of them I don't feel like I would survive in. Um,
Oh, there's a ton I don't think I'd survive, and that doesn't mean I don't want to visit. I just know
yeah,
that it's probably going to end badly for me when I get there.
yeah, no doubt. Ooh, I think this is, it's a sort of shared universe between comics and books and games and or shows. But I love the like uh Avatar, The Last Airbender, and Korra universe world of, the uh elemental bending and stuff like that. I think that world is really cool, and that's one that I feel like I want to spend some time in, and I can maybe avoid dying immediately. I feel like
You,
Marvel's New York, there's always just like buildings falling on people and everything else.
you know, it's so funny. I actually was thinking about that the other day because I always thought, what is it? The one with Will Smith where he gets in trouble for the destruction of property and all that stuff. I mean, they kind of did that a little bit in Avengers, but it's so funny when you really think about like saving the day, but they did that by toppling a building that maybe had 400 people or 5,000 people. Like nobody goes, wait a minute, how many people did they actually kill to save a couple people? Like, let's do
Yeah,
some math.
that was the problem I had with the Man of Steel movie, is like there's a lot of people died in that movie. Like they just trashed a lot of skyscrapers that, as far as we knew, were still
Feels
full of
bad
people.
about it for like 5 minutes of runtime. Like they're like, there, we've talked about it.
Yeah. Like, so I feel like Superman, like part of what makes Superman Superman is that he can save everybody, right? Like he is that fast. He is capable of doing those things. And when people forget that, I think you've lost Superman.
Yeah, no, I think that's true. And it's, I don't know. Sometimes I feel like the storytellers have forgotten that part. Like, they're going down a thought process on what they want to have happen or the action. And they,
Yeah.
I think it can be a world building thing. I see that in movies too. Like you see things happen in movies, you're like, okay, that was an action scene, even if it's not whatever, but you're like, yeah, but they just literally smacked an old woman and knocked her down to run past. Like, we're gonna address that just no, we're not. Okay, cool. We're moving on, Okay. So since you're so big into comics and stuff, what superpower would you want to have?
Oh, this one's easy. Teleportation. I hate driving. I hate commuting. I love to go places though. So like, unfortunately, living in the American South, it is impossible to travel by train and difficult and expensive to travel by plane. So I would love to just be able to teleport from place to place. That's mine.
Okay, so now I'm gonna go down a rabbit hole that because of whiskey. How would that work though? Because if you haven't seen it, how would you get there? Like, how would you think your teleportation power would work? Oh, logic. Did you see that? Ooh, it just happened.
Yeah.
Oh,
I
breaking
mean,
the world.
yeah, I would I feel like there's a lot of ways to do this. I mean, I think, with satellite imagery and stuff like that, you're capable of seeing a lot of places that you can go. You can teleport places. Um and I don't know, use of cellular signals and things now.
He's gonna
But
Google Maps it before he goes.
yeah, just Google Maps that sucker, and I'm just like, I'm going to the corner of Elm and Fifth right there. Just if I could just take that little man and drop him on the map, and that actually put me there, it'd be good.
I want to say that I love that concept, but that would be a fun thing to write about because
Oh
if you
yeah,
think about it, it's kind of like how the hell do you do that? How do you because even if you go there, what if something else is there? What if they put a mailbox? Who knows, right? And then suddenly you're like,
You're
how does that
impaled
work?
by a mailbox.
yeah. That
I
used
like
to be. I feel like they've really downplayed it over the years, but that used to be part of like Nightcrawler's power set is that he could only teleport somewhere he could see. So like if you lock him in a room, suddenly he's useless.
Well,
But,
and I think that's something that is not touched on enough, the simplicity of disabling. Like it's always thought of you have to have this mega thing and you have to have kryptonite to disable, but you just kind of go, well, what if you did this? Like could you disable a superhero that way and for what reason anyway? We could go down a whole creating a universe where that happens. I had a really fun time at one point writing this collection called Super Useless, which were stories about people who had very useless superpowers. And there
mm,
were people in the universe that had really cool ones, but these were the people that had really dumb superpowers. Like one of my friends wrote was the person when he walked around, every time he stepped, it sounded thunderous, like huge, like boom, boom. But he's walking. So can you imagine? Like you wouldn't want this person as a neighbor. Boom, boom.
yeah.
It sounded terrifying, but that's he. So he was in a wheelchair because he was like, I can't be anywhere because it basically rocks the world when I am walking these thunderous walks. And it was very funny to kind of go down this, like, what would that superpower be like for people? I wrote a girl that had to sweat glitter. So every time she sweat, it was glitter. She's a stripper, by the way, just in case you're wondering what she said do with her life. Because like what it was kind of like, what else do you do with that? Because we sweat all the time. People don't realize it, but even micro sweating all the time. But now you're glittery, you're like a disco ball. What the hell would you do with that?
Yeah, that
She could
that
also have been a preschool teacher. They do a lot of glitter.
That's true. That is
it's hell
true.
to clean up after, I imagine.
But exactly. Could you imagine that all of your clothes are just covered in glitter all the time? Your entire house glitter? Because
Carry
I'm
a
a big
dustbuster with
fan
you
of
everywhere you go.
glitter, but I know how annoying glitter can get, right? So anyway, that was really, really fun. Okay, Bo, final question, and then we're going to allow Jeremy to do some shameless
Final
self-promotion.
question. Oh my
Yeah.
God. Well, I have to ask the writing snack question because it's our favorite. What is your favorite writing snack?
Ooh. My favorite writing snack. Um, I am I'm a sucker for various Little Debbie's. Um, if it is, I can stop, I can just run out to the gas station and grab a snack and come back and get back to working. Um, I my favorite overall are the Little Debbie Christmas trees, but they're only available during the Christmas season. So the rest of the year, I really enjoy like a fudge round. Fudge rounds are really good.
Oh, that could be dangerous. Like that would be bad for me if I sat around eating Little Debbie's. Oh my God.
Just eating fudge rounds constantly. You're like,
Oh.
oh, I wrote 5 words, fudge round. I deserve it. It's a little treat.
Even
Yeah,
if
that's why I
wrote
don't buy
a-
boxes of them. I have to leave them at the store so that I have to go get them in order to eat them, you know?
Oh my God. Yeah. Yeah. Oh, no, that's not. Oh, okay. Cool. Okay. Jeremy, shameless self-promotion time. Where can people find you in your work?
So I am on Twitter and Instagram at Jerome58. It's JROME58. I'm on then Bluesky and Tumblr is just Jeremy Whitley. My website is jeremywhitley.com, where you can actually see basically everything I've written. I've got a lot of stuff posted up there, including my various new stuff. Like I said, as we're recording this, The Cold Ever After will be out in a few weeks. That's our queer Arthurian noir adult book. But then I just had the second volume of my series, School for Extraterrestrial Girls, come out, as well as the first volume of The Dog Night came out back during the summer, which is our sort of adventures with talking dogs. So if you're into any of that, basically there's something for every age group. You can check it out, and there's lots of good comics to read, and more stuff coming. So if you follow me on any of those other places, you'll find out about that when it gets announced.
Very, very cool. Thank you so much for being here with us. I really appreciate it.
Well, thank you for having me. It's a ball.
Absolutely. Okay, guys, this has been Drinking with Authors. I have been your host, Erica Lance. My co-host has been the amazing Bo Lake. Don't forget, like, subscribe, do all the fun stuff so the AI knows you're listening to us. And check out Jeremy's work everywhere, and we will see you next time.